The Pitești Experiment. Between 1949 and 1952, inside the walls of Pitești prison in communist Romania, one of the most extreme brainwashing experiments of the 20th century was carried out. Officially called a re-education program, the operation was designed to eradicate anti-communist thinking through systematic torture. Under the direction of the Securitate, Romania's secret police, inmates were forced to torture one another in order to break their own psychological resistance. Victims were made to denounce their faith, family, and even their own identities while enduring prolonged physical and psychological abuse. The process, called unmasking, involved sleep deprivation, beatings, starvation, forced confessions, and mock executions. Those who complied were made into torturers themselves, perpetuating the cycle. Hundreds were irreparably damaged. Some died under torture. Others, released years later, lived with permanent trauma and isolation. Despite its scale, the Pitești Experiment remains rarely taught, even in Eastern European history. The Bhopal Gas Disaster. On the night of December 2, 1984, in Bhopal, India, a pesticide plant owned by Union Carbide leaked over 40 tons of methyl isocyanate gas into the air. The leak occurred due to a combination of mechanical failure, inadequate safety protocols, and neglected maintenance. Within hours, the gas began to settle over densely populated neighborhoods surrounding the facility. People awoke coughing, choking, and losing vision. Entire families attempted to flee, many collapsing before they could escape. Emergency services were unprepared. Hospitals overflowed. No formal evacuation order was issued. Initial estimates placed the death toll at around 3,000 people within the first few days. Long-term effects have increased that figure to over 15,000 dead and 500,000 injured or exposed. Survivors reported blindness, respiratory issues, birth defects, and chronic illness. Union Carbide eventually paid $470 million in compensation, far below international standards for damages of this scale. Today, the site remains contaminated. Cleanup efforts stalled for decades. It stands as one of the deadliest industrial disasters in history, and one that is rarely discussed in detail outside India. The Tulsa Race Massacre. On May 31st and June 1st, 1921, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a white mob, backed by local law enforcement, attacked the affluent black community of Greenwood, also known as Black Wall Street. The violence was sparked by an accusation. A young black man was alleged to have assaulted a white woman in an elevator. No evidence was ever presented. What followed was a coordinated assault on black residents and their property. Over 1,000 homes and businesses were burned. Firebombs were dropped from private aircraft. Thousands of black residents were displaced. Official death tolls reported 36 victims, but later investigations and survivor accounts suggest that the true number may exceed 300. Mass graves were dug, bodies were hidden. For decades, the massacre was omitted from textbooks and state records. Survivors were silenced through threats and shame. It wasn't until the 21st century that serious efforts began to uncover the full extent of the atrocity. In 2021, on the massacre's centennial, the last known survivors testified before Congress, seeking restitution. The Tulsa Race Massacre remains a striking example of racial violence, suppressed through institutional silence. The MV Wilhelm Gustloff sinking. On January 30th, 1945, as the Soviet Army advanced into East Prussia, a German military transport ship, the MV Wilhelm Gustloff, was packed with over 10,000 people attempting to flee westward. The passengers included wounded soldiers, Nazi officials, and thousands of civilians, many of them women and children. In the icy waters of the Baltic Sea, the ship was struck by 3 torpedoes from a Soviet submarine. Within an hour, the Wilhelm Gustloff sank. Over 9,000 people died. making it the deadliest maritime disaster in recorded history, surpassing even the Titanic. Due to its association with Nazi Germany, the tragedy received little international attention. For decades, the story was largely excluded from Western historical narratives. Survivors received minimal recognition, and many of the dead were never identified. The disaster reflects a lesser-known consequence of World War II, the scale of civilian displacement and suffering during the war's final months. Though rarely taught in schools, the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff remains one of the largest single-event losses of human life in modern history, the Great Chinese Famine. Between 1959 and 1961, China experienced one of the most devastating famines in human history. Sparked by the policies of the Great Leap Forward under Mao Zedong, the famine was not caused by natural disaster alone, but by forced collectivization, agricultural mismanagement, and political repression. Local officials exaggerated crop yields to meet government quotas, leading to the seizure of grain that left rural populations with nothing to eat. When famine set in, reports of cannibalism emerged. Villages were depopulated. Entire regions were sealed off from outside aid. Dissent was silenced, and those who spoke out were labeled enemies of the state. Estimates of the death toll vary widely, but conservative figures place it between 15 and 30 million people. In some provinces, up to 1 in 5 residents died. For decades, discussion of the famine was suppressed in China, and even today, it remains a politically sensitive topic. Despite its unprecedented scale, the Great Chinese Famine is seldom included in general world history education. The Congo Free State Atrocities. Between 1885 and 1908, the Congo Free State, a private colony ruled by Belgium's King Leopold II, became the site of systematic exploitation and mass death under the guise of civilization and trade. The primary commodity was rubber, and the labor force was entirely coerced. Villagers were forced into rubber quotas under threat of mutilation, hostage-taking, and execution. The Force Publique, Leopold's private army, carried out the punishments. One common practice was the severing of hands, often of children, to prove that bullets had not been wasted. Entire regions were depopulated through violence, starvation, and disease. Missionaries, journalists, and diplomats gradually exposed the atrocities. Among them was British consul Roger Casement, who documented first-hand accounts of torture and killings. By the time the Congo Free State was transferred to the Belgian government in 1908, estimates suggest that 10 million people had died. Today, the Congo atrocities remain one of the most brutal episodes of colonial history. Yet they are rarely addressed in Western education systems.